First, I want to thank the wonderful people at the ADATH who work hard, who put this together for your benefit. That's Stu Gutman, Alvin Delovich, Rabbi Michael Whitman. These guys work hard. They're behind the scenes people. They do a lot to put this series together. And it's been a wonderful series. I've seen many of the interviews. Saul Zuckerman is a terrific interview, which I have actually interviewed him before for the men's club, and it worked out. People were sufficiently happy with it that was the springboard to be here. I want to thank Saul. There's a lot of extra effort that goes into conducting this interview. Saul and I actually have pre-interviews so that we can cover the story, put it together in a logical form. And I want to thank especially Saul Zuckerman and his wonderfully supporting wife, Anna, who contributes greatly to making everything work and keeping Solly these days a little more on track, although he doesn't really need a lot of help, but the help is there. Yeah. I'll tell you what we're going to, there is a lot to cover. Solly has an amazing life. So we are going to start with a special announcement that Saul is going to make, Lichvod Harav, in honor of the Rav. And Solly, I'm going to let you make that announcement before we start.
Okay, first words I want to say to Rabbi Whitman, Lichvod Harav, which means in honor of the rabbi. So I have been probably one of the oldest members of ADATH, because there are people older, but I've been there consecutively since 1944. Did you want to say something else, Charles? Or
I want to, whatever I have to say, we'll keep going afterwards. We're going to start with you. I want you to announce a mazel tov.
I'll make one announcement. My granddaughter, my new granddaughter, was born at 1:49 a.m., which is the same date as this talk, October 17th, in Yakima, Washington. And that's 4:49 our time. And I will always remember this date, not only because of this talk, but because of my granddaughter's birth. So I just want to say how happy I am. This is my son, Ariel, my baby's second child. And I am happy to be going to Vancouver to visit. He's got a 2.5-year-old and a 1-day-old, half a day old. So I'm going to be going very soon to spend the winter there and to see two of my 7 grandchildren.
Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Mazel tov, yes, indeed. Solly actually has, of his 7 grandchildren, 3 of them are under 2 years old now, I think.
3 of them are under 2.5.
2.5, okay. We are going to start with the interview by Solly talking a little bit about his early years, where he lived. So introduce us, Solly, to, you were born in 1940.
I was born in Montreal on Maplewood in a small 2-bedroom apartment. I lived with my parents, and I'm pretty sure my grandmother lived with us, but I can't say I remember because I was 2 years old when she was killed by a drunk driver right opposite Chesky's on Bernard and Park Avenue on the sidewalk. And it devastated my father, who was an only child, whose father he never met because he came to America to try and find a place for them in 1912. So he had a mother and he had no father and he had no siblings. And he came here and he only had one relative. He had 2. He had Sonia Weisbord, his mother's cousin, and he had his uncle and aunt, whose children were the 4 Barza brothers, who all became professionals. And he lived with them for a year while he was trying to learn English. He came here from Russia, didn't speak a word of English. He spent 1 year after school in his room reading and looking at the mirror to pronounce it right. And he came out of there speaking English like a college professor. As a matter of fact, all my friends, not one, thought he was born overseas because his English was better than theirs. So he had this thing about languages. He spoke a number of languages. And I guess I grew up as soon as I saw with a devastated father who loved me. I was the only child, until 1943 when my sister was born. And it was very, very hard for him, but he was a good man, an honest man. He never said a swear word in his life. He studied. He was a Shomer Shabbos. He was a good man. In 1944, I moved to Dollard because my parents wanted me to get a Jewish education, and ADATH Israel was literally the only Orthodox shul that had a school attached to it at that time. I don't know if there are any since then. So we moved to Dollard. My grandparents took the bottom floor. We took the middle floor, and the top floor we rented out, not we, they, to get some money to pay the mortgage, which in those days was very cheap. So my association with the ADATH goes back literally, I'll be 82 in a few months, so it goes back nearly 82 years.
Just super.
It's
And
an amazing association, and I'm very happy to be here today, I have to tell you, with Rabbi Whitman.
I'm also happy to be able to help in this celebration, and kavod to the ADATH. What I would like to just touch on at this stage of your life and beyond, the major influences in your life were your parents and your grandfather. And that started a little before the ADATH, and we're going to just, if you will, touch on that. And then we're going to move to your 1944 to Dollard, and we're going to explore your connection to the ADATH, which was a major influence also.
Well, my family started out here in Canada in around 1888, 1890. And my grandfather started a business. He was in Hawkesbury. He was a peddler. And then he came to Canada and he moved to St. Lawrence Boulevard eventually, where they were for years in a small little place, about 2,000 square feet. And it was an amazing thing that he, in 1911, my grandfather, Alva Sholem, was one of the founders of Hebrew Free Loan, which is one of the big institutions in Montreal that lends money to people who can't afford weddings, bar mitzvahs. They do such a great job. In 2008, I was put on the board of Hebrew Free Loan, and I went to my first meeting and I looked at a picture on the wall, and I never knew before that my grandfather was one of the 11 founders of Hebrew Free Loan in 1911. Now that made a big impact on me. I knew he worked at Hebrew Free Loan, he helped them, but to know that he was one of the original founders was great. Now my grandmother, on the other hand, did a similar thing. She was at Mizrahi, which was the women's, they changed the name to Amuna, but it used to be Mizrahi. Hadassah was for the women who weren't observant, and a lot of the observant women went to Mizrahi. And my parents were observant, so were my grandparents. So my grandmother actually was involved in the founding of Mizrahi, and she had a chapter. And then my mother came along and opened a second chapter called Amuna Women, with women her age. So I go back, and my father, by the way, was also a chancellor or commander at Pythias at the ADATH Israel. So I come from a family that's been involved in education, in community work, community service for 100, literally exactly 110 years that I know about. But seeing as they were born in around 1870, so in 1911 they were both around 40 years old. So they would have been involved in community work way before 1911. So you're looking at
your mother, by the way, who was your mother, who was Mizrahi, also was a major force at the ADATH.
Yes, she started the ballet at ADATH. My mother was very active in the sisterhood at ADATH. She made the first school that had a ballet class. First Jewish school was at the ADATH. So both my parents were very active in the community, and I got it naturally. And I knew that I enjoy doing mitzvot. I like to be kind. I like to do mitzvahs. I really enjoy working with people. And one of the first organizations I joined, and they're on this Zoom, is Free Hebrew for Juniors. And I joined them, I think, in '83. I became the president a few years later. And Sima and Yossi Paris are on this Zoom. And I can tell you they've done a lot of work with the Friendship Circle and other organizations. They're terrific people. And I can say that everybody I know and all the people who have come on here who I know for many years know that I really, really learned a lot from my parents and grandparents, and I have to give them all the credit for what I've become.
Specifically, I believe your grandfather was really the start of your Jewish education in depth. Is that right?
Well, my grandfather decided that Hebrew Academy, where I went to school, ADATH Israel, was not giving me enough Talmud, enough Gemara, and enough of the vital education that you need besides the Chumash and the regular studies. So he decided, because we lived in the same house ever since I went to ADATH Israel, he decided that we should study together. So literally, nearly every day, I went out in the street to play with all the boys, but at some point I had to sit with him and study. First it was Chumash, then it was Gemara. I studied with him until I was approximately 15, when I guess we moved away, and I was kind of happy because I wanted to spend an extra hour playing, but it did teach me so much. And it was the beginning of my real education that had a lot more to do with my grandfather and giving me the love of Torah. I give ADATH credit because ADATH definitely got me started, and I loved it at ADATH. But my grandfather, together with ADATH, made it a complete picture and a complete learning period.
Super. So one of the interesting notes that I think we'll just mention in passing, that one of your Hebrew teachers was a great businessman, a real estate developer, who you can mention.
Listen, I'm going to tell you a secret that nobody knows outside of ADATH Israel. One of the Hebrew teachers at ADATH in 1955 or 6, I won't give his name until I finish the story. In 1967, when Expo started, I moved into a building at 3440 de Roche. It's called Embassy Suites. I went in, or Embassy Towers. I moved in, and the first guy who came to me when I went to sign my lease was the richest Jew in Montreal's history, David Azrieli. Now, believe it or not, he was a teacher at ADATH Israel. When he came from Israel, he had no money. He was a draftsman. He was making about $200 a week. Now, imagine a guy worth $5 billion was making $200 a week at ADATH Israel. Try and figure out how amazing that is.
Well, I guess the ADATH gave him a good start too. So now, one interesting thing for yourself. You come from your family, your father is religious, your grandfather is religious, your household is from. Money was not their central focus. They had good life. And yet, at a very young age, the age of 9, you decided money was important to you. Well, tell us how that happened.
My entrepreneurship started around 9 or 10 when I decided my allowance, which was pennies, wasn't enough. Not that I needed money. I used to go out and play in the street after school, but I decided whatever they were giving me, 10, 25 cents. I think my grandfather gave me 10 cents a week to study for about, 5 or 7 hours. So you figure out I'm getting about, a penny an hour. Now, I decided that the 10 cents wasn't enough. So I told my grandfather I needed a quarter a week. Now, I had an allowance of maybe a quarter a week, or 50 cents a week. I also decided that wasn't enough. So I went ahead, and with a friend, I started picking up, in those days, there were no ashtrays around in the streets. I picked up butts from the street, and I took them to my grandfather's basement because they were too old. They were in their 80s to go downstairs. And I put a newspaper on the floor, and I took all the cigarette tobacco out of the butts, and I went and got Export 8 rolling paper. I rolled them up, put them in packages, and I started selling cigarettes around. Not very much at ADATH Israel, but I sold them wherever I can get people to buy, and I had a partner, and he went out. So we made a few extra bucks. That was at age 9 or 10. At 12, I went to my father, and I saw so many Cadillacs and Lincolns going around. And I said, you know what, why are we poor? We're not poor. We had money to live, but we did not have extra money. So I don't want to say we're poor. We definitely weren't poor, but my father made a very, very small living, enough to support us. So I wanted to be rich. And I told him, I want to be rich, and I'm going to be a multimillionaire. He looked at me and said, people like us don't get rich. So I want to just fast forward to 1984, when I took my first company public. and I've been involved in about 30 public companies since then. I took the first company public, and my father was there when we got a check for $3 million in 1984 for 20% of the company. Now, if you take those figures and 3 million represents 20% of the company that you're selling, you still have 80%, which is worth 12 million. So all the shareholders, myself, who was a major shareholder, and at that point, my brother-in-law, and a few other people, we got our shares. The truth is that he had no conception how a company that's worth 1 or 2 million could have a value of 15 million. He didn't understand that public companies, the way they work, and I can tell you after being involved with public companies for close to 50 or 60 years, I still don't understand them because nobody understands them. Because you take a company like Mr. Jeff Bezos, his company Amazon had never made a profit. Maybe one quarter he made a few cents, but he never made a profit for, I don't know, 15, 18 years. And his company was worth tens of billions of dollars. Now, other companies never made a profit and they go public and they're making 20 billion. Facebook went public, no profit. They had a market cap of tens of billions. The whole system works on what your perception is on what the company is going to do in, say, a year, 2 years, 3 years. So basically, you put together a bunch of figures, and if people believe you, then you can go public and sell the shares. And it's happened that a lot of companies have gone down the toilet as soon as they went public. A lot after, but a lot before, right when they go public. The truth of the matter is you've got to stay away from companies that are just ideas that someone has, because some of them are actually harebrained if you look at everything that's there. But the history of going public is where you can take a company to the next level. And,
okay,
and
just before we leave your, nevertheless, at 12 years old, you said to your father you wanted to be a millionaire, coming from father, grandfather, where money wasn't that kind of an issue. Your influences, however, were particularly one of your uncles. Is that not right? You had
well, no, my uncle lent my father a small amount of money that he needed to buy part of the business back. But truthfully, it was seeing Cadillacs and big houses. And I'll just add one thing. Because I was so impressed with 4-story homes, twice in my life, I had to have 4-story homes. I just want to tell you that I only did it because I was stupid. Because I remembered as a child seeing these 4-story homes and seeing these wealthy people. And I have to say, I was jealous. I'll admit it. I wanted to be rich. And I made it a point to live in 2 4-story homes, one of them 13,300 feet and one 10,000 feet with an indoor pool. So I did have this shtick that was inside my blood, the same as some people have a thing for learning. I had a thing for learning. I wanted to educate myself, but everything I've done is self. I never went to college. I told you the story, which I'll repeat later, what happened in college, but I just was totally self-made. I really did not have any formal education. I never took one business course in my life. And yet I've run big businesses. And today I'm involved in 15 businesses, of which 5 are big.
This would be a good time to talk about your experience in university, and then leaving it to go into the commercial.
I was at Sir George, which became Concordia, in 1957. My memory is still there. I remember all the years. And I went to school, and I realized when I was taking Commercial Law 101 with a lawyer named Martin Franklin, I had memorized the Civil Code. For some of you who don't know, Quebec operates under the Civil Code, which was written, I think, in 68 AD or something. The rest of Canada operates under the British law. So Quebec is different. It was a small book, and I memorized most of it. And one day, in front of a couple hundred people, he said something about a certain article. And in front of all these people, I got up and I said, Mr. Franklin, you are wrong. And I enunciated, I told him what the right number in the Civil Code was. He said, Zuckerman, to the office, out of the room. So I went to the office and I realized that I really wasn't made for this. I felt that I was smarter than the teacher. I didn't care about him. I hated my courses. So I stayed in school. I passed. But during that time, instead of going to his classes, I found the key for one of the rooms on the main floor, and I started a card game. And literally, I played cards nearly every day with a group of 6 other people. I will not name them, but they're well known, some of them. And we had a card game, and I happened to have won a lot of money there, so I didn't worry about an allowance anymore. But let me go on to talk about what happened. So after school, I decided I really wanted to get a job. So I wanted to be in business, but I didn't want to work for Steinberg's to be a packer. I didn't want to get a menial job with no formal education. I had to get a job somewhere where I could start. So my father and my mother had a friend who was the financial advisor to the Steinberg brothers, and he got me an interview with Nathan Steinberg. I won't overestimate, but Nathan Steinberg actually fell in love with me. He offered me a job immediately, even though he didn't hire people. And I became an assistant to a buyer, first in the fruit department and later on in the non-food department, where I started bringing in my first idea that I had that changed at Steinberg's was they never had a pegboard. A pegboard is this thing that you fit into a bunch of holes, and you put little toys or stationery or any item on that pegboard. And I brought baby goods because my parents were in baby goods. I couldn't buy from my parents because they had a company that were wholesalers. They couldn't sell to big people. So I bought directly from manufacturers, and I built Steinberg's business in non-foods up tremendously. I also became more of a buyer for non-foods, things like yacht mops, which are these white mops, 6 and 8 ounce mops. Anyway, long story short, after 2 years of working at Steinberg's, I went from $40 a week, $1 an hour, to $7,000, which is 3.5 times my salary in less than 2 years. It was unheard of in those days because you got raises of 10%, 4%, 3%. I was up to 7,000. A college graduate in 1958 was getting 4,000 a year. So imagine, I was making at this point literally nearly double what a college graduate got, and I was all of 19 years old. So one day I get a call from, before that, I'll give you the Sam story. I'm in the warehouse one day, and I'm trying to get one. The warehouse was 35 or 40 feet. And they had these trucks that would go and have a lift. It was called a lift truck, and would go up all the way high to pick up boxes to get them down. They had things called pallets. Pallets is what they stock goods on, and then they pile one pallet on top of the other. So this fellow, I asked him to get me a sample. He gets a sample, and as he's bringing it down, someone from behind says, "Stop, arrête." The guy looks down, he stops, and he says, "I'm sorry, I can't get your sample. I gotta go." I said, "Who the hell are you?" And I turn around and I'm angry. And who is it? Sam Steinberg. It was Sam himself.
You did not know at the time.
I didn't know at the time because I had never met Sam. I met Nathan. I didn't meet Sam. So I basically swore at him. 20 minutes later, I'm in my office and I get a call in the loudspeaker. "Saul Zuckerman, report to Mr. Sam's office." They called him Mr. Sam. I go to Mr. Sam's office and he looks at me. He says, "You have a lot of chutzpah." I said, "Listen," and I called him Mr. Sam because I didn't want to insult him. I said, "Mr. Sam, you want me to make money for you. That means my time is important. So you're telling me that I should wait for you to go." I didn't say that your time is 4,000 times more than mine. I didn't say that. I said, "You want me to wait for you? If I was first," I said, "I'm right." He said, "Look, I can't say you're wrong," but he said, you had a little chutzpah." I said, "Listen, I always have chutzpah. Was I working for you or not?" He said, "You were working for me." So since that day, he became my friend. And whenever I saw him, I spoke to him.
You went back to speak to him about once a week, did you not?
Yeah. Fast forward.
His door was open.
Not a year. Less than a year, I get a call from my father. He calls me up and he says, "Shloimele." He used to call me Shloimele. My Hebrew name is Shloimeh. He said, "Shloimele," he said, "I'm closing the business on Monday." I said, "Pa, why? How are you closing the business on Monday? You've been in business for 68 years, since 1892. He says, "Shloimele, we're not making enough money to give me a salary to live. I can't do it. I have to close on Monday. I said, Pa, I'm quitting my job. He says, don't quit your job. You have a tremendous future in Steinberg's. Now, remember, go back to the $3 million check I got for the business. And he said, you have a tremendous future in Steinberg's. I said, you know what, Pa? My future at Steinberg's is never going to be what I can do on my own. And I explained to him, and I said the same to Mr. Sam. So I'll tell you, I went out of the office after I spoke to my father. I went to see Mr. Sam. I said, Mr. Sam, I'm quitting Monday morning. This was Friday. I said, I'm going to my father's business and I'm going to make that into a $100 million business. He looked at me like I'm out of my mind. And by the way, I did. So the truth is that Sam understood what I was doing. So he offered me, he never offers anyone who quits a job. He says, once you quit Steinberg's, you don't get back. So he told me, Saul, you are welcome back anytime you want. He gave me a letter. I'd like to try and find it, but he gave me a beautiful letter that I can come back. So I quit. Next Monday, I start. So I go into a business that actually was making less than $10,000 a year after expenses. And they had my father. He had a salesman who used to be his partner, but gave back the shares because there was no way he could make a living as a partner. He could make more as a salesman, getting a commission. And I decided that the only way I could make this business work is if I do something drastic. So it took me about 3-4 months before I looked at the situation. I saw that my father was getting overcharged by 2 of his friends who sold him soft goods. Soft goods are baby towels, hooded towels, sheets, plastic pads, all the baby stuff. And there were soft goods, hard goods as well. But the soft goods suppliers were 2 of his friends that he knew before the war. And they were basically, I won't say giving it to him, I'll just say totally over. So what happened was I had to take a cut in salary from $140 a week at Steinberg, $7,000 a year. I had to go down to $25 a week, which is less than I made when I started at Steinberg's at $40 a week, because my father had to take $15,000 a year, which he wasn't taking. He was only taking $5,000 a year. So I won't go into the family where my father and my uncle were partners. He bought them out. But the point is, the business in 1960 had a net value of 0 because there was no net income. There was only enough to pay salaries. So my father took $15,000 a year instead of 5. I took 25 a week. Didn't matter. I lived at home. And I went ahead and I started building up the business. After 6 months, I realized that there's a problem. I have suppliers selling me. I can only sell it to small children's wear stores where there's X amount of volume. So the first thing I had to do was build up my volume. So I went across Canada from coast to coast. I went to Newfoundland, and then I went out the other way to Vancouver. And I picked up over 3 trips. I didn't go all the way 3 times. I went just to the Maritimes after, but I picked up over 100 accounts. So I picked up 100 accounts. If I got $2,000 a year per account, that's $200,000. That more than doubled the business. So I got to a point where I can make the volume go up. So what did I do? I went to Regal Textiles, a company in the States, in North or South Carolina, that made the identical items that this Printex and Pretty Baby made. And I bought it from them. And I had it shipped in, and I went to the vocational service. I went to other people to package the goods with my name on it. I put the name Shantex on these goods. I went out and competed with my suppliers. I went to Eaton's, I went to Morgan's, I went to the Bay, I went to Woolco, I went to Woolworths, Sears, I went to Kresge's. And what happens? I had an easy time getting in because they weren't happy with their supplier. I spoke their language. I was young. These other men didn't even speak English, not well. So I went out and I increased the business tremendously. I started selling to chains. Now my business started to grow. I get to $1 million. I'm starting to make real money because my profit margin went from 15% to about 40%. And now I'm starting to make money. And I had salesmen. However, I was the major salesman. I had 1 salesman in Ontario, and I was the major salesman. So now what happens? I find out that I have to do something else. So I needed someone besides me to help me run the business. I had nobody. My father was there. He was an inside man. I needed an outside man. So one day I'm at my cousin's pharmacy. I don't know if anyone was around in the 60s and 50s, but Day's Pharmacy, D-A-Y''S, was owned by Dave Siegel. It was on the corner of Pine and St. Lawrence. He was there for years. Anyway, I went to Dave Siegel and I saw a young boy of 16 years old. His name was Ted Christakos, and his daughter is on the line. And Ted Christakos was making $1 an hour in 1965 at Dave's Pharmacy. And I went in and I went to my cousin. I said, Dave, are you ever going to give this kid a raise? He said, yeah, maybe 10 or 20 cents, an hour. I said, Dave, nobody could live. He's only 16, but he'll be 18 in 2 years. So you're going to pay him $1.30 an hour. That's a joke. I said, Dave, I want to take him. You can find for $1 an hour, you can find any yachts that's out in the street. So what I did, I took Ted at 16, I brought him in, I trained him. He became nearly as good a salesman as me. I won't admit he's as good as me because I'm a narcissist, but he was nearly as good as me. He was a great salesman. He became a great friend. Unfortunately, Ted Alvasholm passed away at age 59 of pancreatic cancer. And it's sad. He was my good friend, but I was with him when he got a check for a few $1 million. And I was also with him when he passed away. I went to his house. I spent time with him. And that's why his wife is going to see this. That's why his daughter's on the line, because I'm very close with the family. I love them, and I'll never forget Ted and what he did for me. So my business went up until, with Ted, from 65 to 70, we started to grow even more. And then I realized that my two suppliers of hard goods were probably making too much money, like the soft goods guy. They brought everything in from Hong Kong. So I took a trip to Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea. And I found with their catalogs, every single item that I was buying. I'll just give you one example. An item that sold for $1, they would wholesale to me for $5.40 a dozen, or 45 cents. Now picture this. I picked up that same item for 10 to 15 cents in Hong Kong that they were charging me 45 cents. I don't need to tell you, when I came back, the first call I made, I actually made the call from the Orient, was to Miracle Mart. And I said, if I give you a 30% discount off what you're paying, will you give me all your business? They bought 100 or 120 items from this company, who, by the way, eventually went out of business, both of them. And they gave me all their business. My first order was for 100,000, which was nearly as much as I did in business 10 years before. So then I went to a company called Stedman's. Stedman's, the buyer, gave me all her business. She just took and wrote out from the catalog 100 items and gave me everything. I can't tell you how much, but I picked up millions of dollars with just 5 or 6 clients, besides all the regular clients that I had, where my margins went from 25% to, I'm talking on sales, if I sold it at $5, I made 65%. So all of a sudden, we started making serious money. So I did business for a few years, and then eventually I got bored.
No, before we leave that, though, you went to Hong Kong and you sourced out your material, and that was the major step that helped carry you through this next phase.
No, that's exactly what I said. I
know that, but wait. After you did that, these guys didn't take it lying down. So why don't you tell us the story, how they came after you and your relations with with a few of your legal friends who did amazing stuff for you.
This was really unbelievable to happen at that time. There's a lawyer called Sam Gadinsky. He was in practice at a firm called Gadinsky and Resin, but there was a Greenblatt, Gadinsky and Resin. He was the Gadinsky. He was a senior partner there with Mike Greenblatt, Dave Greenblatt's father. And when I went to him, someone gave me his name. I told him the story that this guy who's doing, I don't know, 10 million a year or whatever, or 15 million a year, big business, big real estate guy, he owns buildings everywhere. He's suing me to put me out of business. And I told Sam what I did. I took his catalog, which was public property. He never had any item that was patented. I took his catalog, I took another guy's catalog, and I went to Hong Kong and I found every single supplier that was in his catalog. It took me 1 month. And I ordered 1,000 dozen, 2,000 dozen, because it was at nothing, $1 a dozen, $1.20 a dozen. I didn't care. I spent a fortune, but I had the bank at that time that was with me. And I couldn't believe that he was suing me. He had no right to sue me, but he knew I didn't have money. I had enough money, but he was planning to take action against me and to really, he was trying to put me in Dreard, in a hole. Well, Sam Gudinski, the first thing he said to me was, Saul, I will take your case and not. He was one of 2 lawyers in my life that told me, I will take your case if it costs me $1 million. I will not let you down, and you don't have to pay me until we win the case. I said, Sam, what if we lose? Let's worry about it later. Well, P.S., 2 years later, after him taking me to court 22 times, aggravating hell out of me, I did not speak to this man who used to be my friend for approximately 35 years or maybe more. I talked to him lately. He died. He passed away. But the point is, he was trying to put me out of business. That's all. He was taking action against me every other day. Sam saved my butt. And at the end of the day, I didn't have to pay costs. And he went away and I killed him. I took that court case and showed it to every single buyer.
Yeah, but I think one theme which is critical here is it was your personal relationship with Sam Gudinski. They had faith in you, confidence in you, in your relationship.
100%. It was simply because I said that, because he liked me. He liked me when I met him. He thought I was honorable. He liked a story, my story, of a guy who's big and rich trying to put me out of business. I was a little Jewish guy. I was still a young guy. I was all of 30 years old. I looked like I was about 15. He felt sorry for me. He took my case and he became my friend.
That part of it is the amazing part of it. I mean, lawsuits, if you will, are not so uncommon.
I've been involved in many, but I have to tell you this, I'm 8-0. I've never lost one, because it's always people trying to get me. And it never happened that I lost because I was in the right. But sometimes you could be in the right and lose.
That's right. And on top of that, I mean, your relationships and your ability, the relationships you have, for somebody to come up and say he'll charge you nothing unless you win, I know that helps.
No, you misunderstood me. You don't know. I would have had to pay, but he didn't care about when I paid him. It could have been in Jenemsveld. He didn't care.
But he wanted to carry you through, and he was willing to carry you through in the difficult period when.
But Charles, he was so confident that he would win. He told me that it's a slam dunk, and lawyers never say it's a slam dunk.
That's true. Okay. But nevertheless, I mean, part of it is just your great relationship and the fact that they had confidence in you personally and your perseverance to keep it going. So let's, once you had that, you turned your father's, I would say, zero making money business into a multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah.
That gave you a good...
It was fun, but I got bored. So in 1978, I was at an engagement party at the Mount Stevens Club, and 2 guys who I knew from the disco business, they had a disco, but not making too much money. They wanted to open 1234, which was the Ray Walton Ray Funeral Parlor on Mountain Street. It was 1234 Mountain Street. It was an old funeral parlor. It was a huge building. It had a big, up on the wall, an organ, a big organ up on the wall. And what I did, they came to me and said, would you like to finance it? I said, look, I don't want to finance it and be a third partner if I'm putting up all the money. So I said, why don't we do this? They had an idea to buy a couple of automatic bars that, dispense liquor, and they dispense exactly what you put, an ounce and a quarter. Anyway, those bars were very expensive in the 70s. This was 1978. So I decided to go in, but I owned the bars, the 2 automatic bars, and I got paid for that. So at the end of the day, I was close to a 50% partner, but I knew nothing about discotheques. So we opened it. And the amazing thing is we had about 6 months of preparation to build it. And I went to New York with a guy named Wolfgang Triepsch. He was a German architect, and he was the architect we picked. And I went to Studio 54 in New York, which was the hottest club in the world. It opened in 77, if I'm not mistaken. And I went there, and I went in with him, and we couldn't get in. They wouldn't let us in. We came to the door, and if you've all read about Steve Rubell, the most famous nightclub guy in the world, he ran 1234. He had 2 partners, but he was at the door. He didn't like the way I looked. So he said, no, you can't come in. So I called a certain person who is a very famous, wealthy person. And I said, do you have any connections at Studio 54? This gentleman, who was very wealthy, said, I definitely have connections. When would you like to go in? I said, in 20 minutes. He said, make it half an hour. He says, go rent a limo. He says, it'll cost you $100 in those days, $100, $150. Rent a limo, pull up in the limo with your architect, get out of the limo, walk over to the door. And if Steve Rubell says you're not allowed in, say, I think you should look at the guest list that was just sent to you. Well, Mr. Rubell told me to get lost. He remembered me. He said, I told you you're not coming in, and you'll never come into this club as long as I'm alive. I said, Steve, look at your fakakta list. Steve is a Jewish boy, so he knew what fakakta meant. I said, look at your fakakta list. He looks, I said, do you see a guy named Saul Zuckerman with a party of 2? He looks down the list. His face goes red. He says, he didn't know what to say. He was stymied. He couldn't put out a word. I said, Steve, I want to go into the club now, and I want access to everywhere now. And I want you to give me a couple of drinks on the house now. How are we doing, Steve? He was I can't, there's no word in the English language to use what he looked like, but he let me in. I spent 3 hours there. We took tons of pictures. He ended up copying Studio 54. Part of the reason why I did well is we had an identical Studio 54 in Montreal in 1978. I even got laser lights to hang from the ceiling where they flashed light. So the day we opened, we had over 3,000 people. So there's a question, how could an unknown club have 3,000 people opening night? It was easy. We decided, and my partners were part of this decision, they were nightclub people. Every day, starting in March, before the place was built, when there were all kinds of stuff hanging from the ceilings and the walls, every day, 20, 30 people were put in a group from Crescent Street, from Mountain Street, from the nightclub area, and brought to see a secret club that's going to be built. Now, it's a secret. You can't tell anyone. Now, the more you say the word secret, the more people repeat what it is. So by taking 20 and 30 people twice a day, let's figure 50 people a day for approximately 90 days, you got over 4,000 people. So let's say 4,000 people knew about it. That means about 30,000 people know about it, because every person that came and told at least 5 to 10 people. So by the time we opened, there were 3,000 people waiting in line to get in. You have to understand, I was charging $9 to get in on Saturday night, $7 Friday night, $5 Thursday night. Every night of the week you had to pay. I had a fashion show on Monday. And I had more people on a Sunday night than the other clubs that were closed. In other words, Monday and Sunday, most clubs were closed. On Monday night, I did over 1,000 people with a fashion show with Michel Giroir. So I had so much fun that this was a break. So for a couple of years, I barely went into to Chantex.
Okay. From there, I mean, you just kept going, you picked up and everything. You went public with Charan in 1984.
Yeah. Now, I did something before 1984 because I was working at the club. I didn't care about the business at that point because I was making so much money at the club. It was a joke. I mean, the money was pouring in. I can't tell you how much because I'd be embarrassed. So I went ahead and I found someone who would take over my business. I bought his business. I amalgamated it with mine, and we now had a company with an extra $1 million sales, but no profit. But I hired this guy. I gave him 25% of my business, he and the two partners. And we started doing well because he was a professional. We went ahead, and in 1984, I decided to go public because I wanted to be able to cash out if I could. And that was the year that my father saw the check and then passed away. So my business started really booming in 80 when it started to go up. But my personal involvement came back in 1981. I met my wife in 79. We got married in 82, and that was the end of my nightclub days. And I became a serious guy. I went, my mother, Alva Shom, died in 83. My father, Alva Shom, died in 84. And what happened is I started going to shul every single day. And I became a different person. I realized that I had to change my lifestyle where I was running around. And I have to say, I enjoyed every minute of it. It was a return to the old days of going back to the ADATH every day, and I had a good time.
So you had this major change. You got married at 42, so you had this major change at the beginning of your 40s already.
Absolutely.
And that brought you your wife Anna, and it also brought you back to the ADATH by certain circumstances.
Well, one of the things of the ADATH, most of my life has been involved with the ADATH. I had in 1982, I got married at the ADATH. In 86, I became president of the ADATH. In 86, I had a son. I was the first president, I think, the rabbi could correct me, first president that had a son, a child born while I was president. In 1987, I had my older son's bar mitzvah. And because I was president, I had to invite everybody. So I had over 700 people. It was at my home. So I've had, from brisses to bar mitzvahs, I've had a lot of simchas at the ADATH. And my yahrzeit is in another, another 18 days. And my yahrzeit, I will be going to the ADATH to say Kaddish for my father, Alva Shom. So the ADATH, even though I belonged to 12 shuls, and I was living in Toronto, living in Florida, I belong to so many shuls. The ADATH in my heart is something special. And tomorrow morning, Bezrat Hashem, God willing, I will be joining the rabbi at 6:45 for Shacharis.
Super. Let us. We're coming on, and I want some time for questions here. You took your kids on a world trip, a world tour. Would you like to tell us about that?
1999, my wife had a beautiful idea. Because I was retired, sort of, living in Florida, she said, why don't we go around the world? Well, I thought about it and realized that it's a brilliant idea. I never would have thought of it, because who could think to spend, by the way, for her to spend a year with me, she had to be a little nuts. And I love my wife, and she's not nuts, but it actually worked out. We spent a year 24/7 together with three of our four kids, because my older son was graduating from law school. And we went around the world for 1 year. We went to 26 different cities. We spent Shabbos with rabbis in literally every single city except for New Zealand. And we had the most amazing time. My son, Ariel, was 8. He was 9. My daughter, Radon, was 7. And my older son, Sasha, my second son, actually had his bar mitzvah just before we left. So he was 13. Now, to take 3 kids, 7, 9, and 13, who were, I think, going grade 2, grade 4, and grade 7, and to take them on a trip around the world, you can't imagine how many books you need to homeschool. So what my wife did, she was brilliant. She cut the books in half and sent half along somewhere to one of our friends. And we went with the other half. To give you an idea, when we went to Dorval Airport to leave Montreal for 1 year, flying around the world, going to Africa, going to New Zealand and Australia, going to Asia, we went to Europe. It takes a lot of planning. Believe it or not, we made the plans 5 months before or 4 months before and never changed one plane reservation. Think of that, a year, 26 cities, not one plane reservation change. We made hotel reservations, we had suites, we had condos, we had houses, we rented things. That was before Airbnb. And we managed to keep all of our reservations. So it was an amazing time, but I'll give you a little bit. We went with 475 pounds, including half of the books. We came back with 175 pounds. We dropped 300 pounds, as well as sending gifts from all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, all over Europe, sending gifts back and only traveling with our clothes. So it was, to put it mildly, it was an amazing trip. 6 months in Europe were by car, and the rest of them were flying all over the world. And it was just, I have to tell you, my kids remember it to this day. Of course, it was a highlight of their lives. And the highlight of mine too, to spend a year, who gets to spend a year with your kids 24/7 and your wife? And we never had a problem in terms of fighting. And I am probably one of the hardest guys to get along with for more than a minute and a half, as you know. So I will say that something happened where I guess Hashem blessed me that I wouldn't end up having a fight and my wife throwing me out. Anyway, it was a great trip.
All right, because of the time, we're going to just jump ahead a little bit and talk about Oceania. That was one of your major corporations. And then we're just going to move ahead to the companies that you're starting, that started, we're 21, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, because in your late 70s, you're still very active. In your 80s, you're still very active. So yeah, Oceania has a special place for you.
Oceania, it's not Oceania. The first one was Milos. In 1996, I financed Milos. I was a 50% partner. People don't know it because Kostas Piliadis is a sick person. He never admitted to the newspaper or anyone else that I was a 50% partner. I didn't care because I had a paper that said I owned 50%. At the end of it, I decided he was not a good partner, so I sued him to get out. He paid me a huge amount of money to get out. I was happy. It's not worth it to make money if you don't get along with your partner. So I got along with all the partners since then. So in 2003, Oceania, and it was one of the finest cruise lines in the world. For those of you who take cruise lines, we own Regent, which is the #1 cruise line in the world. Oceania is considered #3, but I can tell you Oceania is the best value for the money. We started renting one ship, leasing it. Then we leased the second. Then we bought the first. Then we bought the second. Then we bought the third. And to make a long story short, at the end of the day, we had a phenomenal company. We all made out like bandits. We made an absolute fortune. I was the 4th largest shareholder. So we're 50 odd shareholders, but I was the 4th largest. There were only 3 bigger. And at the end of the day, it was great. And every business has its day. When we sold out to Norwegian Cruise Lines, I basically got out. The problem in the cruise line business now was COVID that really hurt it. Before that, the reason why Oceania started business, I'll make it short, is because 9/11 happened and a company called Regent, not Regent, but there was a small company that bought a bunch of ships, and at the end of the day, they were stuck because of 9/11. Everybody canceled their cruises, and they ended up with a bunch of ships with no people. So we ended up making a deal because the French government owned their ships. So we ended up buying one ship, then a second, and then we bought a third, and then we went on and bought 3 more, and then we sold out to Norwegian Cruise Lines, and that was the end of my involvement with Oceania. But I was involved with a lot of startup companies. We had a company, Surf 9, which had a body glove license for footwear. We had another company called Revoltech, which made headphones, and we sold that to Logitech. And we had another company uh, called the Future Vault, which puts your private information up in the sky. So I've been involved in a lot. One of the latest companies I'm involved in, which I love, is a company called Real Eats. It's a company that delivers food to your home, quality food for people that work and don't want to bother making supper for an hour. Good food takes an hour and a half to prepare. This is 4 minutes or 5 minutes in boiling water, and you have a great meal. They have a great chef they hired now to come up with more modernized food. They're coming up with gluten-free. They're coming up with there's no pork or ham. There's very little meat. So there's a lot of stuff that not kosher, but it's made with vegetables and with basically no meat or cheese products or milk products. So this company is my latest.
An interesting point of that, if I may throw it in, is that your involvement with that started 3 years ago. You were 78 years old. And your involvement with the other companies that you mentioned is 5 years ago. You were 76 years old. So you're still going strong, and you're going strong into your 80s. But I think because of the time, we're going to move over to the last category that I really want to touch with you. And the fact that your training from your mother and your father trained you to give back to the community. Your philanthropy has been very strong. And I would like to touch on some of the institutions that have been helped by you.
Well, I can tell you, I'll start with ADATH Israel. I love ADATH Israel.
Good start for this audience.
I hope Rabbi Whitten is listening. I don't see his face, but I'm sure he is. I love ADATH Israel. There's a place in my heart for it. It's always going to be there. I forgot to mention that in addition to my being president, my father was a gabbai there for 20 odd years. So our relationship with my father and myself and my mother goes back to 1944. And I have given, I love the Y, it's a great institution. I love ADATH. I love the Montreal Torah Center. I love
Hebrew for juniors, giants.
I like Free Hebrew for Juniors. My friend Yossi Paris and his wife Sima, who are on, they founded it. I love Free Hebrew for Juniors. It does so much for the community. I really try to choose places where Jews can come and Jews can be involved and families can be involved. One of the things I'll bring up, which I forgot, was when I was a kid from birth, and I only remember from 4 years old or 3, my mother had a J&F box that was sitting at the door, and any friend of mine, once I was 10 or 12 years old, who would come in, she'd ask to put in a penny, a nickel, a dime, and as they got older and I got older, she asked for $1 or $2. She never asked for 20 or 10. She asked for 1 or 2. She had a J&F box, blue and white, and then she also had a Mizrahi raffle. That raffle sat at the door every day of my life from 1944 till I left at 27. So for 23 years, I saw the J&F box and I saw the Mizrahi raffle. My friends, some of them stopped coming to the house. They got tired of giving her money. I mean, it's one friend, I will not mention his name. My mother was in the hospital off and on for 10 years before she passed away. And one of my friends came to the hospital one day and she hit him for $10. He went ahead, he says, you know, Solly, he said, I love you very much. I'll come visit you anywhere, but I'm not coming to the hospital to visit your mother anymore.
It's too expensive. And yet she was the source of a lot of people doing a lot of mitzvahs in that order.
She taught me and she taught my sisters. By the way, I do have 2 sisters, Risha Liebman and Paula Dubrow. And I think they're both on the line. And I'd like to say that they've been my sisters for 78 and 73 years respectively. So I do know them well, and they're both beautiful people, and I'm very happy that they're on the Zoom.
And your philanthropy and community contribution is not limited to Montreal. You're active also in Florida, Shul Bar Harbor, Young Israel of Hollywood.
Bal Harbor, Bal Harbor, and the Young Israel of Hollywood Beach. I'm involved with 12 shuls, but not the same as ADATH. ADATH is in my heart. ADATH is special for me, and no other shul will ever replace ADATH as long as I'm alive. And I want to say, I've been at ADATH under Rabbi Bender, Rabbi Kramer and Rabbi Whitman. I have to say, Rabbi Whitman is such a superb gentleman. He really is. There isn't anyone I know who can say anything bad. He's a real tzaddik. And when I started Lichvod Harav, Rabbi, I really meant it. I'm not uttering words that some people use to try and curry favor. You are Lichvod Harav. You are really a superb person.
Well, that's super. And the rabbi is here. You're muted, Rabbi, but the rabbi is here to hear it, and I'm delighted he's on screen.
Thank you, Saul. I'm very touched, and Saul and I have a wonderful relationship, and Saul's heart is pure gold. And Saul, I thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, Rabbi, and it's a pleasure to know you. And Bezrat Hashem, God willing, I will be there tomorrow at 6:45.
Okay, on that note, we're going to close this part of the interview. We're going to go to some of the questions. Now, because they came from Stu, I'm not sure who they came from. The first question was, do you remember Dollard Street and all the great families?
I absolutely do, and I probably could give you the names. Well, there's one here. Eleanor Levine is Ellie, who was on my street. She lived right near the lane, if I'm not mistaken, the second house from the lane on the opposite side of the street, on the east side. I was on the west side, and I know Ellie since we were kids. And as it turns out, her sister Jojo bought the house that I lived in on Clark Avenue. Many years later, I found out they had moved into the house that I had lived in and I had put in a lot of construction into. So I know Ellie, and I could probably name you, out of the 90 or 100 families, I could probably name you 60 or 70 families that lived on the street, because there were tons of kids. We played out there every day. We had no TVs. We had no iPads. We had no cell phones. We had nothing. We had a tennis ball that we played on the street. It was called American. You hit it against the curb and you run around the bases. And if you score, you have a run. So we used to go out in the street every day. We had nothing to do in the house. There was nothing to do.
I'll just put on screen here something that your wife said earlier this week it was. And one of your strengths is exactly that. You remember a lot of the people that you come in contact with, and you treat everybody equally. And I just want to, you're not repeating it, so I'm going to repeat it. Comes from Annie, your wife, and she would know. So here, one of these questions is pretty light, but you're in the food business with your real eats. So it says, what would you like as your last meal if you knew this was your last day? Well,
you're not going to believe this, but for those of you who had Jewish grandmothers, I'll tell you what it is. It's griven, schmaltz, and challah, and maybe a shtickle pickle. That's what I would like. Griven, schmaltz. And I love griven and schmaltz. And whoever makes it, whoever has a grandmother or a wife or a mother, call me up. I promise you, I will do anything you want. I love griven, schmaltz, challah, and a shtickle.
That certainly speaks to upbringing there. Okay. Here, I got another. This one comes from Andre Zoldman, because I can tell who it comes from here. He wants to know, how did the 1234 Club wind down or wrap up?
It never wrapped up. It's still open. It is opened. It is reopened approximately 20 times. The business I did in the first month of 1978, they have never done in any year since I left the business.
What a story that is. You know, it's only the time constraints that I think we're going to have to bring this to a close. It's well over, it's well over the hour, but everybody has benefited.
I think there was one question.
All right, so I will ask that one question, even though nobody has asked it at this stage. And that question really is, I was prompted to ask it. Who is your favorite daughter?
Well, thank God I only have one daughter, because my daughter, who's 29, is convinced that she's my favorite child. But I always say you're my favorite, but then under my breath, I say daughter, because she thinks, she's convinced Two of my young children, my son who's 31, who just had a baby, his wife had a baby today, and my daughter, believe they're both my favorite children. If you ask them to swear on a stack of Bibles, both of them will tell you that they're my favorites. Now, my older two kids think it's a joke and they won't even get into it. My older son thinks he's a favorite because he was my first. My second son feels he's a favorite because he was my first with Anna. So all four of my kids, I guess that means I'm a good con man because I let them all think they're my favorite. That's all I can say.
Or maybe you're just well attached to them, because I'm going to read you a comment from Howard, and he wants to tell everyone that you, his uncle, is a true family man. Howard visited with him in so many cities and country. He adores his extended family.
I do. I forgot to say that on Sundays, when I was a child for about 10 years, we went to visit all our relatives on Sunday. That was what we did, even though my father had to work, because I don't work Shabbos. Place was closed on Saturday. But on Sunday, we'd go to visit all my relatives, including my uncle Dave Barza, and we'd sit, and the only thing they fed us was ginger ale and honey cake. I am still addicted to honey cake, not the ginger ale. My favorite cake. I had it every Sunday for about 12 years.
All right. And since we're on topic, and I'm encouraged to continue with this, Ari is asking, who is your favorite son on this Zoom today?
All of them. All of them. Nobody's ever getting me to stick my foot in my mouth. I've stuck it in my mouth enough when I was young. I do not stick it in anymore. Oh, this is my son. What did my son say? Check the guest list. Check the guest list.
Someone called favorite son, check the guest list. Yes.
Yeah, this is my son, Ariel, but I think my son, Sasha, should be on, and Sean as well, but I haven't seen the guest list.
All right. You know, it's good, this sense of humor. It's wonderful to see your kids participating in that. Normally, as happened before, I tend to stay away from, I wonder sometimes if it's a legit question. But in this case, it's terrific to see the response of your kids and your response to them as well. Wishing you every success. It's been a wonderful evening, a very entertaining evening, Solly. I thank you. I thank Anna for her support. It's been a real pleasure, and who knows, maybe we'll have more interviews upcoming. Okay, and I thank the ADATH, Stu Gutman, Alan Delovich, and Rabbi Michael Whitman for bringing this to you. Very, very much appreciated. And that wraps up.
I would like to make a comment, because I didn't thank one person. I thanked my wife, but I thank her again. But I thank Charles. I have to tell you, Charles, I have been interviewed a number of times in Florida, Toronto, here. I have not enjoyed having someone interview me as much as the last two interviews we've had. As far as I'm concerned, from my side, I believe they were perfect. If other people don't like it, well, all I can say is I don't care. I really care a little bit, but not too much, because honestly, Charles, you make me happy. You bring out what I have to say. I did not look at any notes. I had certain points around, but I did not look down. I looked down once, but I never looked at notes. I basically have been talking to you. It is really from my memory, which I believe is pretty good. And I have never enjoyed an interview as much as I have the last two with you. And Rabbi, I thank you again for making this possible. And Alvin, thank you, and thanks too. And I thank everybody for listening in. Thank you all for listening in. And especially one person, Eleanor Levine, who I loved when she was a young girl. I never went out with her, but we were friends. And I think she's great. And I hope we get in touch again soon, Ellie.
Before going off air, Saul, if you don't mind, I have a few words as well.
No, I just thank you. It's from the heart. I much appreciate, Solly, I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Alvin, it's yours.
Yes, yeah. First off, before going any further, on behalf of the ADATH, Saul, we would like to congratulate you and your entire family on this wonderful day, because of the birth of your 7th grandchild. So we all say mazel tov to you, and continue with lots of success in the family. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Saul and Charles for continuing to make the ADATH speaker series a resounding success. Saul, you certainly did it your way, and certainly at top speed, as you said. And it's been truly an amazing adventure and journey throughout your life. We are very proud to have you as a member of the ADATH for approximately 80 years, as you say, and for many, many more to come, and truly a great supporter of the ADATH as you continue to be. I personally loved to hear about your involvement in the Oceania startup, because Ellen and I have cruised many, many times and on various cruise lines, but Oceania is certainly at the top of our list. It's a great cruise line, and we continue to enjoy it and look forward to hopefully in the near future going back on one once COVID allows us to do so. And thank you, Charles, for keeping Saul in check. I know it's not an easy thing, and on track and on time.
He's on track. On time.
Moderator par excellence for sure. And certainly a shout out to Stu for all his behind the scenes technology and operations to make this a tremendous success tonight too. So now just a few mentions on our upcoming speakers, if I can take a few minutes. On November the 21st, Dr. Isaac Katz will be making his presentation. It will be about the history of Jewish life in Rouyn-Noranda, a mining town in northern Quebec. Isaac was the youngest of 3 boys born in Rouyn-Noranda, and his father was the rabbi in the town. Tragically, Dr. Katz's father died 1 month before Isaac's 8th birthday. He will tell us how he grew up Jewish in this small town and then became an endodontist and practicing in dentistry for a 50-year career. The Honorable Lawrence Bergman, who is on screen tonight as well, will be the moderator and has a fascinating involvement with Dr. Katz and Rouyn-Noranda as well. So please don't miss that wonderful story coming up again on November the 21st. The next one after that will be on December the 12th. So mark those dates, please. Our presenter will be Mr. Harry Bollner. He will be telling us his 1973 Yom Kippur War story and the bridgehead at the Suez Canal. Mr. Bollner was born in Romania and emigrated with his parents to Israel in 1951. He served in the Israeli military as an officer and participated in both the Six-Day and Yom Kippur Wars. So he will present to us his unbelievable firsthand experiences in this particular Yom Kippur War and his life thereafter. So please, another amazing true life story that is not to be missed.